All right, hey everyone, back here live at Cloud Native Con, KubeCon, at beautiful Valencia. I'm really happy to have a real live presenter at this year's KubeCon. If you've watched Techstrong TV, he's not a stranger to you. It's my friend Jonah Cowell. Jonah is CTO of Logs. That's logs.io if you're looking, got the URL in, check. And yes, we should mention it's Logs with a Z, in case my funny French accent messes it up. LOGZ.io. Anyway, though, Jonah's a unique personality. He's former Gartner analyst. He's been actually CTO with a few vendors now.
Yeah.
And he's also like a real expert in open source, and he spoke here. Actually, I'm not going to tell your story. You tell your story. Jonah, tell them. What did you talk about? What did you do?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, first of all.
Always a pleasure.
Great. I was telling Alan I'd rather just hang out and talk with him than be interviewed, but we'll do this too.
Someone's got to pay the bills here, Jonah, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, I actually gave the maintainer talk for Jaeger, so I'm one of the core project, people that work on the project,
managing it, yep.
Commit code, that work on what we're doing on the Jaeger project. So I gave basically the update of what Jaeger is, how you use it, and then got into some of the new features that we've launched since the last KubeCon, and also where the project is going in terms of the roadmap and direction and vision. So yeah.
Look, we can't recreate your whole talk here. Oh, we can, but other people would be upset. But, for our audience who may be not familiar with people who don't know Jaeger, how would you describe it to them?
Yeah, so Jaeger is a distributed tracing open source project that was created at Uber, and then it was donated to the CNCF. It's one of a small number of graduated projects.
Very small.
Yeah.
It's kind of exclusive. I think less than a half dozen, isn't it?
Yeah, it might be around 6, 8, something like that, projects. Yeah. Obviously Kubernetes, Prometheus.
Yes.
And then Jaeger is one of the other core pieces around observability.
Absolutely. And of course, tracing has become, it's funny, I didn't know what tracing was, I'm going to say 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? But it's really kind of risen to the forefront of, in terms of, people's attention. And it is, observability has driven a lot of that, but it's such a great tool, not just Jaeger, but tracing in general. Such a great technology that unlocks so many things. A lot of people don't understand, Jonah, the inner workings of how these open source projects work.
Sure.
Especially like with the CNCF, it's foundational.
Yeah.
It's very community driven. So when you say you're a maintainer, right, they know, look, someone founded an open source, it used to be. Like for instance, I just had a couple minutes before you, Tony De La Fuente, he's the founder of Prowler, right, an open source security tool. Basically, well, he's now with Verica, but prior to that, he was Prowler, right? It was really a one-man show. A lot of open source tools were like that. There was the guy behind the black curtain pulling the levers.
Yeah, definitely.
And you had the big wizard, but it was a one-man thing. The CNCF, it's a different model.
It is and it isn't. It's actually
maybe there is still a little man behind
Jaeger
the curtain.
was actually created by Yuri when he was at Uber, and he's still involved in the project. He also wrote the first distributed tracing book, that's the O'Reilly book. It's a great book to read that's foundational around what it is.
But how many maintainers are there?
We have about 6 right now on Jaeger, most of which are, like Red Hat is probably the biggest company behind it because they embedded in OpenShift.
Yep.
We have several people that work on it. And then there's like, Yuri's actually at Meta right now, Facebook.
Right.
And then we have one person at Grafana Labs that also, works on it a bit as well. But it's all, anyone can get involved, and becoming a maintainer is just that you're basically doing regular contributions of code and helping the project. And then at some point, you're asked whether you want to work on builds or some of the other things that make the project function. You want to do releases every couple months and like help share the burden with other people. And then they'll basically vote you in as a maintainer, essentially. And then you have a say on when there's something contentious, you actually have a vote, and but most people agree though.
Things. Yeah,
but most people agree in most projects, so.
I mean, I don't want to give a false sense to people. You're right. I bet you 90% of the time everyone agrees.
Yeah.
There is the other 10%.
Yeah.
Right? And quite frankly, that 10% is a noisy 10%.
Sure.
Right? Where, oh, Red Hat's a really big company and they're trying to chart the course or something. Yeah, it happens, but it happens a lot less frequently in this model than it did in what I call Big Brother open source, right? Where you had just one.
Yeah. And you really most of these people are real engineers that just want what's best for the technology.
Yep.
And they don't really think about their company directly, but they do work on things that their company wants. Like Red Hat loves operators. It's critical to OpenShift. They did a lot of work on the operator for Jaeger so that it was, super robust.
But it's transparent.
Yeah.
It's transparent, and that's the key, right? I don't think anyone begrudges a company making a profit.
Sure.
Or doing something that perhaps is in their self-interest.
Yep.
As long as you're transparent. Don't sneaky, be sneaky about it. Here's another thing though too, and it's the flip side of that, Jonah. Maintaining an open source project like Jaeger, it's not easy. It's a lot of work. There's work involved. You're 6 people.
Yeah.
You might find the rare individual who's willing to do that, quote unquote, for free as a side gig.
Sure.
But the fact that we can have companies like Logs or Grafana or Red Hat or Meta that are paying folks to do this as part of their job. So it's almost like, what made the British Empire great? Their civil service.
Yeah.
They had professional civil service.
Yes.
No matter whether you were in India or South Africa or anywhere in what today we call Commonwealth, that British civil service was the backbone of how everything functioned, government.
Yep.
Having, I think, professional, not that you're a professional maintainer, but having a professional class of maintainers.
Red Hat is one of the only companies that actually has full-time people that only work on open source.
Are maintainers.
Whereas all the rest of us, we got jobs. We have day jobs too.
We have day jobs.
And they appreciate that we work on open source because it's important to our companies, it's important to us personally, and we go out of our way to do those things. But I do think that the thing that Red Hat does is becoming more and more rare because
it's hard.
And it's expensive.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not easy.
Who is Linkerd?
Yeah.
Another very popular, I don't think it's graduated, Linkerd.
I don't think so.
But it's a very popular, one of the most popular CNCF projects here.
Sure.
The company, and I'm drawing a blank now on the company where the originators of the project.
Yeah, I don't know that.
And they of course have sort of a pro version or an enterprise project of Linkerd.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of the name and I can't, I apologize. Anyway, they pay, because I think they have 2 maintainers on that one.
Yeah.
That's all those people do is maintainers.
That's good.
I mean, in practice, it sounds like a great model, but it's certainly far superior to the, by day I'm a system admin and by night I'm an open source superstar, right?
Yeah. We don't really have, I think we have one Uber maintainer who's not basically at a vendor, so to speak.
Oh, really?
That's, that's still there, but it would be great to have more user, major, they do contributions, but they don't really maintain.
No.
So,
Well, even, look, I remember, and I've been involved in open source for a long time. It was something like 99% of open source projects have under 200 contributors.
yeah, sure.
Right? I don't care how many millions of users or downloads you have. The contributor base is always really small. And that's okay. I mean, that's kind of how the model has evolved, where even if you look at like people who pay, for an open, like get the paid version of an open source product.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do better than 3.5%, you've got a great commercial company.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
4% is a good number.
Yeah.
So that's 96% who don't pay.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the ratio, and that's kind of what it makes this whole thing we see around us go round,
Definitely.
right? So that's where it is. Let's talk Jaeger. So new features, new functionality you guys announced?
Yeah, like the most interesting one is probably, and it's a feature that all the users ask for, is you've heard of APM. So when you said I hadn't heard of tracing since the last 3-4 years, it used to be called APM, and it's been going on for
forever,
20 years.
Right, exactly.
And it's the same fundamental technology of tracing.
Yes, it is.
The difference now is that distributed tracing is a lot more lightweight, and APM combines metrics and often profiling, which is something that's coming in open telemetry. That's the next signal.
Yep.
You've heard of logs, metrics, and tracing.
Yep.
The next one will probably be profiling.
Okay.
And that's part of what APM did. It actually does all of these things.
So we're kind of recreating a wheel is what you're telling me?
But we're doing it in a much less proprietary, much more open way than the way that it was done
and hopefully that'll lead to higher scalability, more availability.
Developer control over exactly what happens when they instrument their code. And that's really what open telemetry is enabling. And in Jaeger, we used to have our own SDKs and instrumentation. We've now sunsetted that for open telemetry. That was relatively recent.
So what we're seeing is Jaeger just working much more closely with open telemetry for what they do well.
Yeah, the open telemetry collector was actually a fork of the Jaeger collector.
Really? Oh,
and now we're actually bringing it back into Jaeger
that's very
in a different way. But that's actually how the collector started. And so it's all interrelated, but we've been moving Jaeger more towards APM. So we've integrated Prometheus with Jaeger, and now we can actually calculate metrics on the traces, store them in Prometheus, and then you can start to use it operationally. Oh, is my service slowing down? Is the error rate going up? These are metrics. And now in Jaeger, you have a UI for that and integration. So we're making Jaeger
you just nailed
better.
my next question.
Yeah.
Which is, so how does this play into logs, right? And now we see, right, with the Prometheus and open telemetry integrations, the APIs, and all of this. Now if you're logs.io or logs, and you have this as your base, put your really nice, intuitive UI on top of it with some, support and help features. You got yourself a product.
We also keep the open source UI, so even though we do have a bunch of analytics that we do on the data, you still have access to Kibana or OpenSearch dashboards, Jaeger UI, and Grafana, which is the de facto way of analyzing
all of it in there.
Yeah, so it's all together and packaged and scalable. And
cool.
And we abstract that from users, because if you had to run all that stuff, you'd probably need a few people just to set it up and keep it running and scale it, so.
And that is, so you just hit the word there, it's a scale issue too, right? You could do, I was talking to someone earlier, right, and they said something like, look, if you've got 2 or 3 Kubernetes clusters, you got 12 people, 2 of which are really the cloud experts, you can do 12 different open source tools.
Sure.
And manage each one of them, individually. But when you want to scale, you've got to bring that together into something that allows you to see across. So it's interesting. Logs news, anything new with logs?
Yeah, I mean, aside from observability, we also do security, and we've got a really interesting SIM that we're seeing a huge amount of interest in. Because once again, back to the scale issue, SIM is great when it works, but scaling SIM can be expensive and difficult. And
Amen.
that's what we're good at doing, so we just scale the back end. And
Yep.
Yeah.
And so in my time in security over the last 25 years, SIM never worked. I'll be honest with you, it was a great idea.
Yeah.
Billions have been spent on implementing it. Very few organizations were able to point and say, it really worked well for us. At best, it was okay. Anyway, we've got people waiting. Jonah, I want to thank you for coming in, man. I'll see you back in Florida.
Yes.
If you ever want any diving tips, by the way, for Florida diving, here's your man. He's an expert. You can write him Jonah Diving. No, I'm only kidding. We'll be in touch. We'll see you soon,
Always.
man.
Thanks a lot.
Jonah Cowles, CTO of logs.io, that's with a Z, as well as the maintainer of the Jaeger project. We're going to take a break. We have next guest getting mic'd up, and we'll be here in a moment. Hi everyone. Excuse me. We're back here in KubeCon, called NativeCon in Valencia. I don't know what it is, but the people come in waves, right? It gets a little quiet, and then all of a sudden, look, it's busy again. We try to filter out the noise, so hopefully you're not hearing too much, but it's a noisy, we're in a noisy area here. And it's just great to see. I haven't seen this many people in one place in a long time. It was, yesterday was a little, it took me a little getting used to. But anyway, let me introduce you to Deepti Cigaretti.
Right. Yeah.
See, yeah? Okay. Deepti is with Planet Scale, and if you were watching our coverage yesterday, we had Nick from Planet Scale on. But the reason we brought Deepti on is, in addition to working at Planet Scale, she is one of the maintainers of the open source project Vitis, which is a graduated CNCF project. And we were just talking, I thought there was only about 8 graduated projects, but Deepti tells me we're up now to like 14 or something.
I may not have that number exactly right, but there have been several graduated projects.
So that's fantastic. Because that, I mean, for those who aren't familiar, reaching the graduated level is the highest CNCF level. And what it really means is that you have sort of a self-sustaining projects where the community is big enough, deep enough, involved enough, the maintainers and code contributors are broad enough, and again deep enough, that this project can kind of stand on its own 2 feet. It'll continue to grow and evolve and do its thing. Doesn't mean it's not a CNCF project anymore. It's just where it is in terms of support and all of that. Anyway, I've said my piece. Deepti, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience? Let's talk a little bit about what you did before being a maintainer on the project.
Okay. My name is Deepti Cigaretti. I'm a software engineer at Planet Scale, where I lead the Vitis engineering team. And Vitis is the CNCF graduated project like Alan just told us. And I also play the role of technical lead for Vitis among the maintainers.
That's fantastic.
Vitis started at YouTube back in 2010, and in 2015, it had its first deployment outside of YouTube, and that was at Flipkart. And after that, several large companies adopted Vitis, including Square, Slack, Pinterest, GitHub, JD.com in China, and given Vitis's adoption, it was donated to CNCF in like 2017, 2018. And Planet Scale was started to, initially to pretty much provide Vitis as a service, but where Planet Scale is now has moved beyond allowing people to use Vitis to building a database that anybody can use, even if they have never heard of Vitis. So a database that everybody can use and love is what Planet Scale is all about.
So what's interesting is when we look at sort of the typical commercial open source business model, right? This is not unusual. You have a company that's formed that provides education, support, training, and then premium feature sets over and above the pure open source. And that was, as you mentioned, that was what Planet Scale, the initial kind of, thought was.
Right.
But funny things happen in the market.
Yes.
and companies see what is available to them and what the customers want, what the market wants. And so that's the way it's gone.
Yeah.
I don't want to embarrass you, but I got to ask you. So there's a lot of people watching out here. A lot of them are women or other underrepresented communities. And they say, look at this lady. She is the chief technical maintainer of this huge graduated project. and she's got it going on. And how? Give them a little of your personal story. How did you
Okay.
come to be here?
So I graduated college with a degree in computer engineering.
Okay.
So to start with, I studied engineering, right? Electronics engineering and then computer engineering. I think what happens in many parts of the world is that many women never even go into a technical field. Societally, women are directed more towards the nurturing, caregiving, or artistic type of
Right.
professions versus the hardcore technical engineering type of professions. But for whatever reason, I went to engineering school, and then I got a job as a software engineer at a supply chain optimization company called I2, which you might have heard of,
Okay.
which was big in like the early 2000s. So I became a software engineer. Eventually, I became an engineering manager. But then I did have kind of a setback in the sense that not every work environment is equitable or friendly to the underrepresented
Yeah.
categories of people. So there was a workplace where I was an engineering manager, I was at the table in the discussions, we are talking about company strategy, but I didn't really have a voice. And at that point, I was so disillusioned that I actually wanted to quit the industry, not just the company, right? So I ended up taking about 6 weeks off. I quit that job. I took about 6 weeks off, and then I started consulting. And I did consulting for about 4 or 5 years. And at that point, I had recovered enough from that experience that I wanted to be in the thick of things. As a consultant, I was sort of on the periphery to some extent. So I started looking for a full-time job again, and I guess it was just luck that to some extent brought me to PlanetScale.
What fate?
Yeah, I was one of the early employees at PlanetScale. I've been with the company for over 3 years. And what attracted me about PlanetScale was Vitis, because I had wanted to work on open source, and I had not done that before. And it wasn't something that I was able to do in my free time, because I had a job and a family and 2 children and a home, and you have to put time into everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I was at a stage in my own life journey where things were easier because the kids were a little older. So
Me too.
I could actually work at a startup without it being overwhelming.
Yeah.
And in terms of Vitis, once I joined PlanetScale, we were very small at that time. Besides the founders and the engineering lead, there were only 2 other engineers. I was one of 2 engineers. And we needed someone to start working on Vitis with Sugu, who is the founder of Vitis and a founder of PlanetScale. And that was me. So I started working with Sugu. And I have to say that Sugu has been an amazing mentor, sponsor to me, because he was in my role until late 2020. And then he actually transitioned the leadership role of Vitis and the engineering leadership role for Vitis in PlanetScale to me. So I've had these conversations with other women, and what we sort of agree on is that you can take as much initiative as you are able to. That's not sufficient. You need somebody to recognize that you have the potential and the ability, and to sort of pull you up, sponsor you, make way for you.
Right, make it possible.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you something. So we do some scholarships back home in Florida for underrepresented communities to learn to code, become software developers. So the fact is, in the country today, or in the US at least I think it is, there are more STEM degrees for women, awarded to women than there are to men. But much like you said, from the time they graduate college to the time you hit or work in the workforce, those numbers flip. And so though there are more STEM degrees awarded to women, much less women in STEM careers, in STEM jobs. And so something is wrong here, right? There's a disconnect. Women work hard, get their degrees, and then, much like you, I'm afraid, get discouraged or choose another path that maybe is a little easier. Like, no one wants to walk uphill. Maybe that one's downhill. I don't know. But there's that disconnect. And it is good to have a sponsor, right? I mean, but
it shouldn't be necessary.
That's the point. It shouldn't be necessary because, I mean, so here's the thing, so in baseball, there was a very famous manager in baseball called Branch Rickey. He was with the Brooklyn Dodgers before the Los Angeles Dodgers. He signed Jackie Robinson.
Okay.
He was the guy who brought Jackie Robinson into baseball. And he used to say that luck was 80% perspiration and 20% inspiration, right? You make your own luck.
Yeah.
So I would like to think it wasn't that you were lucky to be at Planet Scale and become this person at Vitis. It was the culmination of everything you've been through in your life. Sometimes God has a plan and it just comes together, right? So you were in that right place at the right time. Excuse me, but had you not been through what you've been through, had you not had the education, had you not had the career, had you not already, had children raised that you could give the time to it, it all has to come together. But it's an interesting, as I sit here, I'm older, right? As I sit here, most everybody gets their moment, right? Gets their time. It's a question of, do they seize the moment, right? Do they seize the day?
Yes, I think that's a great point. So joining a startup is always a risk, and there are times in your life when you feel like you can take the risk, and there are times when you don't feel ready to take the risk. And women are also many times socialized to be risk averse, to do the safe thing. I think it is changing though. When I see younger women,
yes, it is.
People are much more open to taking risks, which I think is great.
Absolutely. Just real quickly before we go, because there are people waiting, for people who want to get information on Vitis, is it vitis.org or where do they go?
So we are at vitis.io, and myself and two other maintainers are here at the conference. We have a project booth in
very cool.
The other pavilion. It's
in Hall 2.
It's in Hall 2, and we also have a maintainer talk tomorrow.
Great.
Tomorrow afternoon. And that's available on the virtual platform.
I was just going to say, if you're not here live, you can see it virtually as well. Yeah. And then Planet Scale is planetscale.com.
Planetscale.com, yes.
Deepthi, thank you so much for being our guest. It's a pleasure. Good luck. Keep us posted. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I think Mitchell may be coming on here for our next interview. We're live in Valencia at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. We'll be right back. Excellent.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome back to KubeCon, Cloud Native Com. Mitch Ashley here with Razil
Hi,
Tabib,
yes.
CEO of CodeFresh. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm relieving
Happy to
Alan
be
here, so I got to get my rhythm going. Thanks for you're working with me here. So, a developer conference. It just feels amazing to be walking around t-shirts and backpacks and talking code, right?
It feels great to be out again, to meet with partners, to meet with customers, to meet with leaders in our industry. So it is feeling great.
Man, I want to get out my JetBrains, IDE and start writing some code. Yeah, we'll see about that later. So, well, introduce yourself for folks that may not know you, and tell us a little bit about CodeFresh.
Sure. So my name is Raziel, and I'm the CEO and founder of CodeFresh. And basically, our mission is to help organizations deploy software way more frequent than before. Almost every organization now, they always strive to deploy software frequently. CodeFresh, we enable them to do that. We're basically a GitOps company. I think as we all know, GitOps becoming the way of how to deploy software. So we help our customers implement GitOps on top of Argo CD. And yeah, it's been great so far with this event, really seeing how Argo is picking so much momentum in the market.
Interesting. I'm hearing GitOps more and more, and as a topic, I was at an analyst event for telco, and they were talking about edge computing and edge networking and GitOps and pop-up networks and declarative kind of infrastructure definition. So it's gaining some traction, and obviously good for you.
Yeah.
You're happy about that. What do you think it is about GitOps that is getting people's attention and why they're adopting it?
I think it reminds me the days where we've all seen how everyone is moving from waterfall to agile. And basically the reasoning behind that movement was we need to release software way more frequent. We can't just hold ourselves back with these releases every year and a half or every few months. We have to move much faster, and GitOps is exactly along the very same lines. It's a deployment practice that allows organizations to deploy frequently, deploy multiple times a day. It takes away all this whole chaotic previous way of us deploying. Everything is stored in Git. You can roll back, you can see what the changes and so on. And it's part of this really kind of an ongoing transition that everything is stored in Git. Not just the application code, but also the infrastructure as a code, and now the application configuration as a code. So, and what's exciting in this event that we've actually seen, it's no longer kind of the practice of the cutting edge unicorn or startup of the world. It's really coming into mainstream. So our customers now are more and more Fortune 500 that they realize we made the first kind of decision to move into Kubernetes and cloud native technologies. The second question is okay, so now after we made that decision, how fast we can deploy to this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's where practices like GitOps, open source projects like Argo comes into play.
Well, and I think it's part of taking some of the complexity out of all the things that we use, Kubernetes being a big part of it, of course, but the stack that we're using, and that changes constantly. Yes. Often I don't think about things as being in any state anymore. It's always fluid, it's always changing. Just assume it's under constant change. Exactly. You can't look at it at any one time and see the same thing twice. And that's the world we're in. I mean, imagine Fortune 500 that does some kind of business partnership with another company, and they want to open a new service and put it in Saudi Arabia and South America. And I'm not going to go provision data centers to go do that,
exactly.
Right? And I'm not going to provision whole stacks. I want to be able to just say, this is what it looks like, go deploy it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the Fortune 500 companies across almost every industry, they realize that there's new companies coming in that disrupting this industry with software. And if they will not make this shift to move as fast, they will basically lose their leadership in the market. They will lose their momentum. So we had one of the very early insurtech companies and the company as a customers that came in, and now we've actually have traditional, big insurance firm in the US that say, okay, we can't just, stand back. We have to also see how we're moving fast. Same from, fintech companies, the medical companies, and so on. So, as Anderson Horowitz, said that, software is eating the world. I think we are getting more and more like strong feel of how this is becoming. COVID to some level accelerated it when we really kind of invested a lot in technology to help us close a lot of the gaps of things that we couldn't do. But it's just this momentum continues, and across every industry, gaming industry, medical industry, fintech industry, they're all looking to see how we can deploy software more frequently, but again, just have it in a way that we're not compromising on quality. There is no chaos in our deployment and so on. And GitOps comes right into that niche to help them with streamlining these deployments and stay, organized, stay stable, stay with high quality, secure, and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're no longer chasing the killer app.
Yes.
Right? You never hear anybody talking about that anymore because
that's true.
What's an app today may not be one tomorrow, and we've got the next thing coming out a few days later, right? Tell us a little bit more about CodeFresh. I know you've had some announcements and made some really good progress here recently.
So we've been, in the market really helping our customers with deploying to Kubernetes. And more recently, we've kind of really focusing on helping them implementing GitOps, and beyond GitOps, progressive delivery. As you said, we continue changes. And as we're continually making changes, one way to mitigate the risk of the changes is doing progressive delivery, like implement Canary or Blue-Green, in which we're just not changing the old version to the new one. We gradually expose it to our customers, and at any point of time, we run all of these checks to see that nothing goes wrong. What we've announced this event, which is really, really exciting for us, because Algo came up as not really the leading technology. Leading technology for GitOps, the recent CNCF survey, Algo came up as one of the fastest growing projects. But with this announcement, we're actually making the usage of Argo CD, Argo rollout, and so on, so easy. In the same way that GitHub in the past did it for Git. You want to use Git, don't go and install it. You go in one click, you get this Git, just go to work.
Your account ready to go.
We announced the same thing for Argo CD. You want to get Argo CD, you're getting up and running. Connect your cluster in a secure way and start deploying. You need multiple instances of Argo CD because you want to scale, and we have, we spoke with some of our customers, Fortune 500, they have hundreds of instances of Argo CD. You want to run 100 instances, you want to make sure that each cluster has its own dedicated for security reason. In one click, you get it up and running. You can integrate it with your rest of your ecosystem. You can have secret management. So we're super excited about it because we basically we really democratize the usage of Argo CD even more than it is now because it's a great technology already.
It's interesting, and you use the term progressive delivery. We usually hear about continuous delivery.
Yes.
Which is descriptive in itself, but I think I like progressive because that's how apps come out, right?
Yes.
Or more than just apps. All the infrastructure, all the code, all the software.
It is becoming, and it's on multiple layers. We're really talking now about the progressive delivery of the code itself, of how we can start exposing the code to larger and larger, but gradually are part of our customers. But you can look at it in other layers. When we work with our partners, whether it's Split or LaunchDarkly for feature flagging, it's a similar concept of I'm implementing the features, but I'm not immediately open it for everyone. I want to minimize the risk, so I open it to a subset of our customers, and then so we're working with them too. But it's customers are implementing this progressive delivery on each level of their application.
I don't know about Tesla and GitOps, but Tesla as a product is what I've described to people as progressive delivery, right? On all levels, because they may be upgrading the software that controls the motors, electric motors, the interface, what we see as an app on the dashboard, driving, whatever it might be. All of those things are on their own kind of path and frequency, and
true.
feature rollout or upgrades
Yeah.
or trials with a few customers, that progressive delivery, and it's a great model. I think people can relate to that. Like, oh, it is an ecosystem of software that
It
it's
is.
all
And-
happening in concert with each
And
other.
Tesla is just one example. You know, we also have customers, large customers that have medical devices in hundreds of hospitals in the US, and their ability to gradually push these deployments to these remote devices and try it out in a subset in some hospitals, see how it works, and then roll it out to the rest of the hospitals. That's the future. It is exciting because that's the future. That's how everything is connected, and software is really driving how our life is, getting more and more interesting and more, easy and enjoyable and so on. Yeah.
I know you had a packed session here. You were talking at a session, I believe at KubeCon. You had really good
We
attendance.
have Dan who on our team. We had a very, very busy sessions. I think most of them were around GitOps. We had a GitOps day here before the event starts, and that was the biggest GitOps we ever had. I think we're comparing that to the one we had in Los Angeles in the last KubeCon. This one was packed. You couldn't bring more people in. Also the sessions, the maintainer sessions for Argo CD. It reminds me when the open source project really becoming the standards. We've seen the traffic here, both in the CNCF Argo booth as well as at ours. So it is, this event for us is really very strong reinforcement that our efforts in pushing this technology forward are really being receptive by the community, and community want us to push it even more. We had launched end of last year certifications for Argo CD, really allowing you to get the basics and principles of Argo CD and GitOps. It's been a few months. We have over 8,000, certified developers that wanted to learn about, Argo CD. There's certain companies that make this certification kind of mandatory as part of the onboarding of their employees, because that's the new way of deploying software.
That's exciting times. It's
It
great
is.
to talk with you. Congratulations on a
Thank you
successful
so much.
show. Thanks for joining us. We got more interviews coming up. Be sure and check out CodeFresh. Is it .io or .com?
CodeFresh.io.
Yeah, I thought so. .io. So be sure to check that out.
Thank you so
More
much.
interviews coming up. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a few. Hey, welcome back to KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. I'm joined by Victor Gemov, who is Principal Developer Advocate with Kong. Welcome.
Long-time listeners, first-time caller. It's great to be on the show.
Hey, we're glad to have you on. You made it through the screening.
Yes, that was great. It's great to be here. Just to be here with the real people, not Zoom calls or whatnot.
Yeah,
so
that's not like a screen. We're looking at it.
Yeah,
and exactly. It's a little familiar and foreign at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
it feels a little bit weird. We used to do this, but after that we stopped, and then should we get back to this? Well, yeah.
Yeah, yesterday I was walking through, and it's like, backpacks, t-shirts, developers, this is my people. I love this.
We're getting back. We're back. Yes.
It's great to be back. Well, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Kong too.
Yes, I work as a principal developer advocate at Kong. At Kong, we're cloud API connectivity platform. Everything started at Kong as an API gateway, and Kong right now is roughly 32,000 stars on GitHub. It's a pretty popular API gateway in the world, also open source. And we're starting to exploring different aspects of the API connectivity and how we can help developers to build their apps and move their apps to production. And for the last couple years, we spent a lot of time on contributing to Kuma, which is a CNCF open source service mesh project. And also we have developer tools. Insomnia, it's one of the tools that developers like to use for testing their APIs, like REST, gRPC, GraphQL, what have you. So and I like to just talk to people and try to help them to understand how they can solve the problems with our tools. Things around in service meshes, sometimes people think, oh, I'm so confused, what is that? What's the difference of the API gateway and the service mesh? How are they similar? So that's my type of conversation I have.
I was going to ask you that, if you would talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think we can envision the API gateway and how that might function and what that does for discovery and that kind of thing. How does that fit with service mesh? What's the connection there?
So I think the example
no pun intended, but
yeah. That's a good one. I think the example that I usually like to tell people depends on where you're coming from. So if people more or less familiar with the API gateway or the idea of gateway as a enterprise integration pattern, like awesome book in the past, learn different patterns, how you can build the apps. And API gateway implementation, gateway pattern, something that sits in between your consumers of your API and your API servers, and does some of the things that you didn't put into logic of your service for some reasons. API gateways provides the ways how you can encrypt traffic, provided things around traffic shaping, rate limiting, caching, and all this type of stuff.
Authentication, access control.
Yeah, I like to compare this to, you go into a bar and there's a bouncer that's meeting you, and basically it can be this bouncer, and you can show him this ID and saying that, hey, I'm kind of want to go inside, and it validates this. Even though your barman that sits, bartender, sits inside the bar, don't need to check the ID for everyone. So because it was checked on the gateway level, it means that you admit it and you're good to go. So once you get into the party during this thing, this is where you kind of joining by someone that introduces you to the crowd. And this is where you kind of joining the part of the mesh, and you getting this first bootstrap configuration information about the topology. What are the services? There is the Gary, he is our order service. This is the Steve, he's our, I don't know, the email service. And you get this information already inside this kind of party. And after that you just say, okay, so now I need to send the orders, so I will call the Gary, and after that, Gary will probably call the Steve to send emails to our users. So that's kind of the idea where you have someone that sits in front of your traffic. It's a gateway, and the service mesh helps you to do discovery, gives you our communication secure because you're already inside and you can go freely talk to everyone, because inside there no one else will be able to get in. So you have this secured communication using MTLS.
Well, and also, it's a great analogy, also that service mesh is constantly changing too.
Yep.
I mean, Gary, the order taker service, might be split. You might have new functionality that gets either in that service or pulled off into another one. And you don't want to have to go find out about those changes the hard way, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to have a place to go where your apps know, okay, that's the API that I use, or that API is now here, and I don't need to know that it's a different service, right? I'm still talking to it, that kind of thing. Well, what's there's a great vibe here. I think everybody's happy to be back together and be talking software. What's your sense of the vibe? I mean, what kind of cool things are happening?
So the cool things are happening, just like things are happening. That's the most cooler thing that actually happened. But from perspective of the community that I'm close to, like we did before KubeCon started, I was a part of Service Mesh Con. I was helping with creating the program. I was a part of the program committee to help pick up some of the good talks, and that would be interesting and innovative talks from the different vendors and contributors from different open source projects to talk about the service mesh technology in general and maybe some of the specifics. It looks like this year there's a lot of conversation about how we can make service mesh more accessible for users, and different the vendors and different people have opinions about what components of the service mesh needs to be simplified. There's good talks around the core of most known service meshes, like this kind of a sidecar container that built on top of Envoy project. And one of the announcements that happened during the, literally on the day of the Service Mesh Con, is that Envoy community announced that they also will be providing a gateway API support. So Kubernetes Special Network Interest Group, Network Special Interest Group, working on designing this standard gateway API for Kubernetes that will allow to kind of like define things more granularly versus ingress. And now the two CNCF projects, Contour and Emissary, they will be joining forces, and they will be joining as a one, they're merging, and they will be joining as a kind of like a Envoy gateway. That's exciting news because like with Kong, where kind of our gateway story was bread and butter, we were working together with this special interest group to shape the standard, but also we implemented this on the Kong side of things and on Kuma side of things as well. So we already implemented the Envoy-based gateways, and we implemented Kong-based gateways as well. So that's exciting things, and it looks like we were doing a lot of, and we're happy to join the movement and the help to contribute to those projects, and it's a pretty exciting future. I hope next year I will be sitting here and talking about like how this project was successful, and like adoption of Gateway API was quite broad, and like people like to use it.
I can see why you'd be happy.
Yeah, exactly.
It is, there's definitely a momentum increase around open source projects collaborating, coming together, becoming one, or whatever it might be. Where there's open telemetry, on the observability side is a real successful
It's very much similar that happened between the open, it was like open census, and it was open tracing. Yeah. And they joined forces, and now we have an open telemetry.
And I think that's happening. We're seeing more and more of that, as opposed to, there's some competing ideas too, but then there's also people realize there's a lot of commonality, and they'll come together and collaborate. And so it's just, we've kind of reaching a new level of collaboration through open source.
Still the trust in the humanity, and at least as a like a technology part of the world, we can, instead of fighting against some of the disagreements, like I don't know, like tabs versus spaces, we can have support both, and unless you have a strong opinion about this, so or like Vim versus Emacs or this type of stuff.
You just can't let it turn into the standards war. Some of those discussions are a little
right. Discussions can be really heated. Yes.
I don't want to go there. Well, cool. It's great that you stopped by. So talk about some of the things that folks can do if they go to the Kong website and what you have available for people to check out.
So essentially, personally I work on like a video side of things. I love doing like YouTube videos, and if they go to Kong YouTube channel, I would appreciate if they go. go to Kong YouTube channel, Kong Inc.
Subscribe, like.
Yeah, like, subscribe, all these things, exactly. And on konghq.com, you can find like a extensive documentation around the things. There's a documentation around the open source side of things. There will be some of the things marked as an enterprise. So Kong is a commercial open source company. We do a lot of open source work, but also we have the business side of the house that helps to fuel this. We like to call it as a kind of like a flywheel. So we use some of the innovations that we develop during the open source and put this as a kind of like a business side of things, and we use money from this to sponsor some of the open source work, like Kong Ingress Controller that I already mentioned, that has like a gateway API implementation, and the projects like Kuma and the projects like Insomnia, open source, and community like quite active there. So we're happy to have this kind of balance between the open source and commercial side of things.
I think that's key today, to be in the developer space. You've got to be credible in open source, as well as your own technology in which you do.
For us, open source was always part of DNA, like the way how the Kong started, the founders were basically started the API marketplace side of business, and they were successfully sold this part of the business to Rapid API. I guess it's back in 2015-ish, and they open sourced the technology that was driving this thing. So they open sourced Kong, and since then, we just like only going onwards with the adoption, and people like to use it, and it's easy to use, performance-wise, it's just a great tool.
Part of software eating the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. yes, it is.
Well, Victor, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for sharing us a little bit about what's happening with the Envoy group and some of the open source projects and what Kong's doing.
Thank you for having me. It's great. It was nice to see you, Mitch. And my name is Victor Gamov, and as always, have a nice day. Subscribe.
Doesn't have any problem promoting himself, which is good. Yeah, go check out his stuff. Go check out Kong. Victor Gamov, principal developer advocate with Kong.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We got more coming. We have fantastic interviews like Victor coming up next, so stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Same channel, same bat station. See you in a minute.
Bye.
Hey, welcome back. We're at KubeCon, we are at Cloud Native Con, and talking to some fantastic people. New friend, new gentleman that I just met today, James Steele, who is a partner community advocate with Linode. We know Linode well, done a lot of work with you both in our research group as well as with Techstrong and the media side. Welcome. Hey, good to have you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you today.
Thank you for the Techstrong conversation.
Indeed.
So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and tell us what your role is at Linode and maybe a little bit about Linode too.
Yeah, sure, sounds good. So we have a very strong business selling sort of cloud hosting services direct to businesses and also to some consumers, gamers. Where Linode wants to put some focus is in the MSP space. There's a really good fit for an MSP and Linode services in terms of us being well priced, the personal level of support that an MSP is likely to need, and of course the performance as well. So for the little guy, there's a really good match-up with Linode services and MSPs. My job is to make sure that MSPs know we exist and to help them understand quite how to adopt our services and where we might fit in their portfolio.
And you have your background, you've worked in the MSP space, both here and prior to Linode?
That's right, I've been working in the MSP space for around about 15 years now, so I was previously...
Okay, so you know it well.
Yeah, managing director at a VAR-focused distributor, working with MSPs as well, and previously vendors too. So yeah, understand the space, and I'm now just trying to match up the technology at Linode and the people with the MSPs.
Yeah, just as an aside, I know from my own experience, not everyone in an organization, a product company, service company necessarily understands the partner side of it and what's important to the partners, what they need to get out of it, what they need to be successful. And it's super important to have, not just an advocate, but someone that can connect those dots, put the right programs together, so MSPs thrive with you as a partner, not just you're on the list of products that we resell or we want you to sell us.
It's very much, yeah, I totally agree. It's very much with the MSP side of it. The reason I love it is it's a relationship thing. I get a real buzz out of talking to MSPs about their businesses, and they want someone that they can trust to work with, a dedicated point of contact and a company that's aligned with them and who actually gets what they're trying to do. We're not trying to just sell at them, we're trying to be in a partnership, and we understand that the buck stops with them when they're talking to customers. So it's really important that we are. It's a true partnership. It sounds a cliche, but it's a true partnership.
Yeah,
so,
it definitely is.
There's a lot of value in that.
Well, I'm curious, how, coming to this with your experience, how do you think about the MSP space within the cloud market, within the cloud service providers? We've done some research showing that while the large hyperscalers that we all know, you guys are thriving extremely well. And it isn't either or. Many people have a multi-pronged strategy. They may be in one or more hyperscalers. They're going with Linode and similar folks in your category. And collectively, you make up about the size of one of the hyperscalers of all the alternative providers. And it's growing, I mean, it's happening.
Yeah.
So where I'm going with all this is, I'm sure as your customers progress in their own use of Linode and working with you, there's certain things they're looking for that might be satisfied through a MSP kind of partnership and offering.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that we're not going to these guys and saying, hey, you're using AWS or Azure, drop that. We're the one-size-fits-all option. We know where we fit, and we know that we are the simpler option for some workloads. So that's our message really, is that, okay, that's fine. A lot of the partners we work with are AWS partners as well, but they know that certain client requirements, they don't necessarily want that bloat, that depth of features that AWS provides. It's a fantastic platform, but Linode knows its space, and it's particularly well suited for SMBs, which is why, obviously, the MSP matchup is so strong.
Yeah, I'm sure that that means something too in our world. From what I know about Linode too is, there's a great deal of emphasis. I know it's really important to Linode, this relationship with your customers, and the kind of saying support is sort of an understatement of what it really is. The relationship that you have with your customers, and they expect differently from you than they're going to have from a hyperscaler, where they're kind of an account number to the
very much so
big guys.
Yeah.
No offense to the big guys, but I would imagine that's going to influence how you work with your MSP partners and help them understand how to work with your customers and their expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can really spend the time making sure that we give them, as much attention as they need during that onboarding process, during the pre-sales, post-sales. And as you say, it's not just about technical support, it's gone down, what's happening, because of course that never happens at Linode.
Yeah.
But it's the professional services as well.
Right,
So
no breaking news there, but yeah.
yeah, indeed. So it's providing that whole wraparound service, really. And as you say, as you rightly point out, it's the kind of, regardless of size or spend, we're there for the little guy as well, and that's the important message, I suppose.
Well, and there's a lot of complexity in not just offerings in hyperscale clouds and the market as a whole. The business relationships of what people are doing in the cloud are getting complex, and one of the things from our research, it showed that people are concerned about their cloud provider, service providers being competitors to them, because oftentimes they start out as, hey, you're a great partner, and then suddenly they're doing that service themselves and competing with you. And it's one of the things I think important that I found anyway from our data, looking at like an alternative cloud provider, is I want a little cleaner relationships. I want to make sure that you're not going to be in my business tomorrow.
Anyone else talking to that MSP is potentially a competitor, right? I mean, it's they need to own that relationship, and they need to have trust in any partner that they're working with. So I totally agree. If it's someone that could potentially come in and offer the same services or take business away, then that's a real problem. So I think for MSPs, they need to be partnering with, particularly with like sort of developers to provide. So they're providing the platform, working with developers to provide the solutions for their SMB clients, and hopefully working with providers who get that importance of the relationship, and that's where we fit in.
How do you measure the success of a partnership and MSP program? Obviously, revenue is an important factor. What other things are you looking for to know, hey, we're being very successful at this, we're doing the right things to build this ecosystem of partners?
I think in terms of sort of metrics, I mean, we look at, obviously, I mean, we are looking at, kind of the lifetime value. We want to build, partnerships where it's not just a kind of spin up one server and that's it. We build a long-term, lifetime value to the partner. But we're also, the enablement is a big focus. So it's bringing the training elements into it. So making sure that we're looking at, okay, how many people have done gone through our onboarding process, both sales and technical, bringing that side of their knowledge up. So really, I see, if you can enable the partners, provide them with the education, it kind of, and then some support, it kind of, the results follow. So it's really the enablement piece I see is probably the most important. Does that answer your question? Or,
yeah, no, I think so. It's more than onboarding, right? It's like that customer success.
They call it enablement. I don't like these buzzwords, but it's the kind of, do you know what you're doing with us?
I think that's the right word, but it's about the outcome, not the getting them on your product and, okay, good luck. Hope you're successful using our stuff, and we'll see if you renew at the end of the quarter, end of the year. No, you don't want to be there, right? You want to make sure people are engaged, using, connected, then there's stickiness to your offering, right?
And I think the other element is making sure that you give them the time up front when you're having that initial conversation, as actually understand your business. Okay, so who are you serving, what are you trying to do, what are your, we don't go into too much of the fluffy stuff in terms of values, but we get an idea of what they're trying to achieve and really understand what level of help. Because some people will know exactly what they're doing, don't need so much hand holding, but we're there with, potentially there's some complex technical solutions to be able to say, right, we've got somebody on hand in pre-sales who really knows their stuff, who can walk you through a cloud migration or whatever the scenario might be. It's really important to understand them first and then work out what they need and provide that help, I think.
Great. Now, how long have you been with Linode? It's been like 6 months or something?
Yeah, I'm pretty fresh.
Yeah. Well, in some companies, that's an old timer, but these days it's hard to know,
in the tech space, I think you're right. Yeah.
It kind of is. Why go to Linode? What was it that attracted you to that opportunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm passionate about the MSP thing. I've been doing that for a long time. And actually a colleague introduced me, Richard Tubb in the MSP space, he told me about Linode, and the Linode values and where they're strong in terms of that sort of people focus, the price, the performance, that alternative offering. I could just see the perfect match up for MSPs. So I just thought, right, okay, I can see an opportunity here for me to really make some inroads. And they're growing so fast that it's a case of just a little bit of attention in this area and understanding, some love and attention for the MSP space, and I think we'll achieve good results. So
and if folks don't know, Linode's now part of the greater Akamai.
You picked up on that,
world.
That's good, yeah.
Yep. And yeah, we've had conversations about that. And I think I'll use a buzzword, there's sort of enlightened acquisitions, I think, happening now where people are like, leave Linode alone, let them do what they do. We're not acquiring them to suck in their technology and Borg the company and then destroy it all later. In 3 years it's all gone. These folks are doing something right, that's why we bought them. Yes, it's technology, but it's more than that. It's the business, the brand, it's the relationship. And let's build on that and maybe complement it. I'm kind of giving the rosy picture, it's not always roses, but that seems to be more the approach that Akamai and Linode are taking.
That's the impression that I get too, and it's a really exciting opportunity, and particularly for me. I mean, I work heavily, obviously, in the North American region, but elsewhere, having the Akamai brand it's instantly recognizable. You've got the network there. It's the network, the edge, the compute combination is really exciting. You know, Linode has done an absolutely fantastic job to build the business to where it is now. But I think that, there's a lot of exciting potential with Akamai on board as well. It works both ways. You know.
It seems like there's good synergy too, because Linode, I used to use Linode a long time ago when I was running an IT organization.
Oh, very good.
And they were known primarily as the developers hosting the developers cloud, catering to developers. Well, I think that's all still true. That market's evolved, and enterprise, mid-level, you're going after all the business now, and I would imagine an Akamai also helps you in that space because even more credibility. Not that you weren't before, but you're part of a bigger ecosystem and sustaining what you do.
Definitely. I mean, obviously they have a very much enterprise focus. We're SMB. With combined technologies, there does seem like we can service that kind of middle segment where there is, but definitely demand for both sides, both services. So yeah.
I would think partners that'd be attractive too. Great.
Very much so. And it's funny being at the show, over the last couple of days. It's an amazing number of people say, "Oh, hey, I'm using Linode," and oh, hang on, right, okay, so I didn't pick up on the
What's
PR.
That logo up there?
Yeah, and actually I'm a customer of both, or I've started conversations with both, and so that's kind of just reaffirms that, okay, it makes sense what we're doing here and combining the two businesses.
Good. Well, we look forward to seeing great things happen in the MSP program at Linode.
Thank you.
Not to setting any expectations. Other people will do that for you. You don't need me doing that, but I'm sure great things will happen. And appreciate you spending some time with us.
Sure.
And sharing that MSP perspective. We don't always talk about that, and that is just as important as anything else we talk about, because that's how business gets done. So.
Absolutely, and hopefully we can do more of this in the future. But thank you, it's been really enjoyable talking to you, and thank you for the support. Obviously we work closely together, that's great. And
happy to do that, some interesting research projects. So check out techstrongresearch.com. We have a new report that we just issued, and there's some interesting webinars and things that we've done with Linode, both as Techstrong and then the analyst part of the company. So linode.com is where folks can find out more.
We have our $100 free credit offer. If you want to just come along and just try a service, you can use it for 60 days for $100. Get $100 of credit for the service if you're ready. If not, you can pick up the phone and speak to one of us about a solution and let us know what you're working on and how we can help.
Yeah, I think you've been. My experience is pretty frictionless to work with. So
hopefully that
good
continues.
stuff.
Yeah.
All right, James
Wonderful.
Steele, who's head of the partner program at Linode. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you joining us too. As I said, stay tuned, same bat station, bat channel. We'll be back with some more great interviews like we had with James here on Techstrong TV at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. Good to have you back with us here at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. I have the pleasure of being joined by Jonathan Simons, who's CMO with MinIO, neighbors here in our booth alley. Welcome, Jonathan.
Yeah, I've watched you interview the intelligentsia of the cloud native world for the last 2 days.
You've been studying up. Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you're a little bit of a intelligence gathering. Hey, well, tell us about yourself and tell us about MinIO, and we'll kind of dive into the data world and Kubernetes.
Yeah. So my name's Jonathan Simons. I am the CMO of MinIO, as you mentioned. I was the first marketing hire. I've been there a little over 3.5 years now. And it's been a really extraordinary journey because the world has changed a lot from a technology perspective in that time. MinIO is an object storage company. We're known for a couple things. One is that we're multi-cloud, so we are on every public cloud, we are on every private Kubernetes distribution, so OpenShift, Tanzu, SUSE Rancher, HP Ezmeral. We're on bare metal, we're at the edge. The binary is only 100 MB, so you can have the same consistency from the edge to the core. And we're also known for performance, which I think we'll probably talk about here in a little bit, but object stores are now really primary storage in the cloud, and so they have to be fast, and so they have to be able to run databases, they have to run AI and ML workloads, and so forth. And so those two things really are the primary things that distinguish MinIO from the rest of the world of object storage.
It seems like object storage speaks directly to developer and kind of the cloud native architecture, and as well as Kubernetes as opposed to storage in general. So clearly, it sounds like you're addressing that, but even more so is the data sprawl that's across multi-cloud, non-cloud environments that you'll run in lots of different locations. So that's part of the problem you're addressing, correct?
Yeah, so listen, multi-cloud is one of the great challenges that enterprise face today, because whether it's by acquisition, whether it's by shadow IT, or whether it's by design, or whether it's any number of reasons, all large enterprises are multi-cloud enterprises. Nobody is in a single cloud, and if you are in a single cloud, you basically have taken on risk that you probably want to start to mitigate at this point, because so much of your business may be dependent upon that single cloud. And so multi-cloud is a great challenge, and the way it is solved is through Kubernetes. And so MinIO is a Kubernetes native object store. The company was started in 2014. Containerization was in full swing. Orchestration still wasn't fully decided, right? You had Mesosphere.
Pretty early in,
you had Docker Swarm,
public adoption,
and you had Kubernetes. Obviously, we all know that Kubernetes ran the table and extinguished everybody else from that market. But that was always in our DNA, so containerization, orchestration, and then Kubernetes was a natural for us. That's because of RESTful APIs. You talk about developers, that's what they want. They want HTTPS. They want RESTful APIs, and so that's what that delivered them, and that's what S3 delivered them as well. And so the ability to basically take S3 and through Kubernetes, make object storage available anywhere is what we're providing, and that's what enterprises are desiring today. AWS S3 is a remarkable product. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude. Having said that, it only runs inside of AWS S3. Data, to your point, exists everywhere and is being created everywhere, from the edge to the core. It's just being created in all these different places, increasingly by machines. And so what you need is the ability to run that AWS-like infrastructure anywhere you want to. Kubernetes gives us the ability to deliver that for enterprises.
And it gives you that consistent interface pattern storage across all those diverse environments, so you don't have to worry about API differences between S3 and a Google Cloud or whatever it might be, or SAN or wherever it might be, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because you have the Blob API, right, in Azure. You've got, Google's got its own Cloud Object Store API, and then there's S3, and those three don't talk to each other.
Right.
It's a huge issue. But if you can run MinIO across all three of those things, you solve that problem instantaneously. And you can just write your applications, which are probably already written for RESTful APIs in S3 today, and you can run it across that. And that goes for Alibaba Cloud, and that goes for IBM Cloud, and Oracle Cloud, and any cloud you can think of. So it is this ability to have a consistent API, consistent performance, consistent experience across all of those different platforms. And again, the cloud, and we talk about it in terms of, when we say it, we often say, oh, it's the public cloud. But the cloud is really a mentality, it's an operating model, and that's what I think one of the big themes that we're seeing here at this Kubernetes, is that it is an operating model, and whether its location is independent of that operating model. And so, having that cloud approach is what's driving adoption for MinIO.
Let's talk about, one of the things that always comes up with storage is performance.
Yeah.
And thinking about object, there was a day when object databases were new things, but they weren't high performance yet, and as we've kind of folded that in more to a software architecture than thinking of it as a database, what does that world look like? What's performance look like in an object storage world today?
Yeah, so I think historically people looked at object storage as sort of cheap, deep, and slow, and that was a function of what the appliance vendors were really designing for, which was archival data. S3 changed the game on that. If you go back and look even at the early days of S3, it's a very fast service. And that allowed object storage to become the primary storage in the cloud. Redshift is built on top of object storage. Snowflake is built on top of object storage. BigQuery is built on top of object storage. All the most successful services that run in the cloud are object storage. They're based on object storage. That's because object storage was basically made fast. MinIO followed in those footsteps. We've invested very, very heavily in optimizing for AVX 512 chipsets for our friends at Intel who are right next door to us. And so that goes into erasure coding, that goes into encryption, that goes into everything else. And so we're producing benchmarks that are like 365 gigs a second on reads, 160 on writes, on 32 nodes of NVMe, right? So at that speed, any workload now comes into play. So databases can speak directly to the object store and query the object store directly, and you're going to see more and more announcements in the coming weeks and months of first-class, giantly deployed across the globe databases that are now looking and making object storage their first-class citizen from a storage perspective. So that's what performance brings. It brings database workloads. The AI and ML workloads were already on object storage because of the requirement for both performance and scale. And performance at scale is a totally different animal. And Kubeflow ships, for example, with MinIO embedded in it. But you see those types of workloads, and that's what you get out of performance. It's not just vanity numbers, it's about business results for customers.
It's interesting, you add database products, technologies to the equation. Now you're open up to a much wider set of applications that is accessible to the cloud.
Yeah, and I think that's very uncomfortable for the traditional SAN and NAS folks because they fight this concept that object storage is primary storage, even though the evidence in the cloud is clearly there. They would like you to believe that again it's slow, and but it's just a much more efficient and elegant way to approach the cloud, and it is Kubernetes native.
So I was going to say, yeah, it's very much in the Kubernetes architecture, and very comfortable for developers. You don't have to adopt it, they're already doing it. That's how they think of storage.
Exactly, they know it, this is just in their DNA, and one of the things why we love coming to KubeCon is these are our people. Like every single person who comes up. I've said
on several interviews, like t-shirts and backpacks, this is my people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But everybody who comes up is like, oh, we love MinIO, we're running MinIO, and everybody we've interacted with, they know us already. We're not having conversations about what is object storage or what is MinIO. It is, we just love what you're doing, please keep doing it.
Now you have, I think, I don't know if I'd say unique, but certainly a very desirable adoption model. You don't have a big sales force.
Yeah.
Customers, I don't know if I'd say come to you, maybe that's overstating, I don't know, maybe not. Tell us about how people get to you, get to MinIO.
So it is very, we've built a different machine, it's a much more efficient machine, and that's allowed us to do a lot of things differently than other organizations. We don't have a commissioned sales team. We have some really smart business people who have engineering backgrounds that if you squint, say they look and feel like somebody who's a senior advisor, and that's exactly what they are, but we don't have any commissioned salespeople. 100% of our business comes inbound, and it literally comes inbound through partners, or it comes inbound through hello at MinIO, or sales at MinIO, or they walk up to the booth and say, it's time for us to talk about a commercial license. We've gotten to this size. And so it's AGPL v3, so it's frictionless from an adoption perspective, but AGPL v3 is an open source for open source applications model. It's a purist model, But if you're building a commercial application, you're going to need a commercial license. And so it is
It's well known and understood. I mean,
yeah, and it's a really good model for us, and it's allowed us to get to the point where right now we're doing 1.3 million Docker pulls a day. And we're going to pass 1 billion Docker pulls here in a few months in aggregate, and they're just extraordinary numbers from a growth perspective, and just and you're growing off of huge numbers to start with. So we feel really good about the trajectory of what's happening at MinIO these days.
Well, speaking of 1 billion, you had a pretty impressive, really impressive fundraise. I think round B happened back in January, right?
Yeah. The world's changed a little bit since then. I think we all know that in terms of the great revaluation, as they're calling it. But yeah, we closed $103 million at a $1 billion plus valuation. Intel Capital came in and was the lead investor on that. Pat Gelsinger personally presented the term sheet to AB and Garima.
Yeah, not a bad thing to happen.
We align so well with his view of the world these days, which is developers are the the engine of value creation in the enterprise. He believes that deeply. That comes from his VMware days, but he also believes that increasingly data is going to be created outside of the data center. And so you have to be able to operate at the edge, and MinIO does that very well. So it was a very good fit. They were previously an investor in MinIO. We also brought in SoftBank's Vision 2 fund alongside all of our existing investors. But it's exciting, and that 103 million was really, it's a marker to the rest of the industry that we're here for a long time. We went 5 years on our first Series A, which was $23 million. Trust me, we can go a long way with the efficient model that we built without having salespeople and sales engineers in offices all over the globe with $103 million. And our revenue ramp just keeps on going up. So it's super exciting.
Yeah, I don't have data to back this up, but I think Pat Gelsinger's time at VMware really reshaped his strategy for going back to Intel and helping Intel think in a software world what Intel's role is and how to work with companies like yourself that are, let's face it, you're not a NAS, you're not hardware storage, you are object storage, and think about it much differently.
Yeah, I think he understands what software-defined storage is, why it's important in the marketplace, how that has to be optimized on Intel chipsets. I don't think there is any better person for that job at this time, and I think that's one of the reasons that he went back. I think he feels a very strong moral obligation to the Intel brand, and I think he probably recognized that if it wasn't him, it may go in a different direction. And I think you think about mission-driven individuals, I think he's really qualifies in that regard. And like I said, I think you can already see his imprint on how they are operating today, and I think it's exciting, and it's good for the rest of the tech industry.
Yeah, investment in MinIO is a good example of that too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Well, Jonathan, it's been fantastic talking with you. Appreciate the good neighborship, neighbor without fences. We can actually have good neighbors without fences, as the old saying goes. So be sure and check out MinIO, as we talked about. It's really an inbound model, and a lot of people go check it out and get started and connect with what you can do with object storage and Kubernetes. So wish you the best. Have a good show.
Thank you very much
for joining us.
I appreciate it.
I told you we'd have great interviews, and I delivered. So come back, and we've got some more lined up for you that are great like Jonathan. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a few.
Hi, my name is Max Gagliardi. I'm the co-founder of the Ancova group of companies, as well as the host of the Talk Energy podcast, which is a podcast that I started about a year ago, which covers kind of a wide variety of energy topics. I have leaders on from kind of the energy space and try to touch on a little bit of everything with that. So this presentation that I put together today is called Bitcoin, Energy, and Decentralization. The Ancova group of companies historically has been a energy-focused group of companies. We do natural gas marketing and sales. We do midstream and energy infrastructure. And so you may be wondering why an oil and gas guy is up here talking about Bitcoin at a tech conference. And I'm often thinking that question to myself some days lately. But the last year, our company has been very involved in the Bitcoin space. And hopefully through this talk, I can tell you about kind of how I got to this point, what we're doing in the space, and how it interplays with energy. And I'll kind of go through in the order of the presentation is really start off at the beginning, kind of talking to the technical aspects of Bitcoin. And I'm not a technical guy. I've worked with engineers and scientists my whole career, so I'll do my best to try to describe it as simply and concise as I can. Some people have varying levels of understanding of Bitcoin. So for some of you, this may just be stuff that you already know. For other people, it may be something that you've never heard before. So I'll try to talk about the technical aspects and then break it down in layman's terms. And then the middle part of the presentation is kind of about energy and why I think it's important. And then the last part of the presentation is kind of around some of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Bitcoin, and then why I think the case for Bitcoin. And then I'll just touch briefly on like what our company does, and Ancova Digital, which is our Bitcoin platform. So, and then do questions. I'd love to do some questions, so I'll try to finish early. So Bitcoin 101, Bitcoin, and this is taken directly from the white paper. So this slide, and the white paper was written by Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the inventor or inventors of Bitcoin, who are an anonymous person or persons. And this is part of the very first paragraph. So I'll read through this and then I'll break it down in kind of layman's terms. But Bitcoin is a purely peer-to-peer electronic cash system that allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution or trusted third party. The Bitcoin network timestamps these transactions by hashing them into an ongoing blockchain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. And the longest chain, or the longest ledger, which is basically what the blockchain is, serves as the proof of the sequence of events that have been witnessed. And the longest chain comes from the blocks that show that they have the proof of work, which is the CPU power. The messages are then transmitted across the blockchain, and every node on the chain validates that each block has that proof, and that effectively forms what the Bitcoin network is. And so another key thing to remember is that whenever a block is formed and the proof of work is done, you get a reward, which is Bitcoin. Only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be created on the network. So, first time I heard that, I kind of glazed over reading the white paper. I was like, okay, cool. This is like internet money that you can send back and forth to each other. This is kind of neat. I didn't really think through the ramifications and the implications of what something that was truly peer-to-peer that didn't have a trusted third party, because there's really nothing like that we have. And so for me, it took a while to really think through that, just because, again, there's nothing that we experience day to day. Even if you use Venmo, it feels like you're sending money from some person to another person, but there is just this huge stack in between of financial institutions and all these things going on. Or for example, when you use your Apple Pay at the store, it doesn't just settle right then. In fact, sometimes settlement of that payment can happen weeks later. So there's this big kind of cumbersome system in the financial network. And with Bitcoin, it is literally peer-to-peer with zero trust or zero institutions in the middle. And so I'll talk about later why that's a big deal, but it took me a while for that kind of to click. So the way that the network works, and I'll try to just explain this simply, effectively, there are transactions. So I trade a Bitcoin to you, you trade a Bitcoin to me. That transaction gets broadcasted across nodes, which are effectively small computers that people can run, individuals. Like I run a node at my house. I don't get any money or get anything from that other than there's some privacy things that's nice about running a node. But each node effectively contains the entire blockchain. So every time a new block is added, it gets broadcasted to the network. It stores it on that node. And nodes can do different things, and I could talk a lot about it. But effectively, each one of these nodes is like a small computer with a hard drive. The miners, which are these powerful computers called ASICs, are processing these transactions and batching them into these blocks. And a new block is created roughly every 10 minutes. And so not only are the miners processing the transactions, they are solving a cryptographic puzzle effectively. So think of it like I don't know if anybody's watched Harry Potter. I've seen it some. I think the game is called Quidditch, where they fly around, they try to catch the golden snitch. And if they catch this elusive thing that flies around, then the game is over and you win. And that's kind of how it is with these blocks. Like if they can solve the puzzle and show that they did the work, they then can stamp that block with the proof. So when they broadcast it to the network, everybody on the network can trust that this is a valid block. So there really doesn't have to be anybody saying this is true, this is false. You know because of the proof that it is a valid block. And so once it shows that it's valid, once they solve the puzzle, they broadcast it to the network. It's then validated, and then the process repeats, and you add blocks to the blockchain. And it's effectively just a giant ledger, which is essentially every transaction back to the very first block. And so it's just a record of all of it. Like I said, every 10 minutes is the target time to create a block. If it's happening faster than 10 minutes, so if it's happening in 9 minutes and 50 seconds, then that means more computing power has been added to the network. If it's going slower, so it's 10 minutes and 30 seconds, that means computing power has been taken away from the network. So roughly every 2 weeks, the network will recalibrate and try to target that 10-minute interval. And so what that means is it'll either get harder or easier to mine for the blocks. And so each time, again, when the miner finds the puzzle, they get rewarded with Bitcoin. And so there's this natural incentive system to expend the computing power, expend the energy, and then get the reward of Bitcoin coming back to you. And so we'll kind of move on. So there was a problem in computing when it came to systems, and this is a problem that people thought couldn't be solved for, I think, decades, basically going back to when the first networks were being created. And it was called the Byzantine's general problem. And essentially what it was that how can you have a network where you don't need a trusted intermediary or a centralized figure that's validating what is true, what is false on this network? And the analogy was you've got 4 generals or some group of generals. They're all different, nations, and they've banded together to attack a single foe. And so the only way that they communicate is by sending messages to each other. And so how do you know that that message is valid? If 3 of the generals are saying attack and 1 of the generals is saying retreat, and that general is a traitor or a bad actor, how can we validate whether it's true or whether it's false? And so there has to be some kind of proof that that is a true message. And this is the problem that you faced with networks. So if it's like your Visa, it's easy to figure out whether these transactions are true or false because you're Visa and you house everything in a centralized database and you control it, and your systems engineers and software engineers have put it all together. So you kind of know, hey, is this in our system or isn't it? If it's a distributed system like Bitcoin, you've got independent actors all around the world that are processing these transactions, that are sending Bitcoin back and forth, that are mining for Bitcoin. How do you find a way to make it to where you don't have to have somebody who's the gatekeeper? And proof of work, this idea of proving that the message was true, was really the invention. Proof of work coupled with the difficulty adjustment was really what solved this Byzantine's general problem, which many people thought couldn't be solved. And so this is kind of important to think about when you think about the energy consumption and why it's doing what it's doing. And so Bitcoin is just this kind of incredible network that has never been hacked. It's never really been materially compromised. It's been going for 13 years strong. I think it was 13 years. This October 31st was the 13th year since Bitcoin launched. And proof of work has really been at the heart of why this network is so resilient, why it is so anti-fragile. And if you think about it again, I'll break it down. So the process goes where you have to use this electricity and apply this computing power to guess the answer to the puzzle, right? The more energy that the Bitcoin network uses, the stronger the network is, the harder it would be to compromise this network. The Bitcoin network benefits also because it has got the network effect. It's been doing it for 13 years. So people, we'll talk about all the questions for Bitcoin later. People say, well, why can't there just be another Bitcoin? Well, there is millions of these computers around the world hashing, and hashing is basically solving these calculations. And it's some crazy number. It's like every second there's more hashes than there are like stars in the visible sky. I mean, it's like there's just an insane amount of computing power going into this network. And so the more energy that's expended, the more secure the network is, the more anti-fragile it is, and the more resilient. And so it would basically take just a monumental effort to compromise the Bitcoin network. Again, it's never happened. A lot of people have tried. In fact, there's tons of people every day that would love to try to do something to hurt Bitcoin. But compromising the blockchain would not only be very costly, it would just be unprofitable. So the amount of computing power that you'd have to put towards compromising the network would be far more expensive than just mining the blocks and getting the Bitcoin reward. So you're incentivized, not only would it be very hard and almost just logistically, I don't want to say it's impossible because nothing's impossible, but not only would it be a huge logistical undertaking, it would be very unprofitable to do so. And so it's not just the energy consumption. When you first think about proof of work and finding out how to have that proof to show that your block is valid, it is the logistics, it's the manpower, it's the technical expertise. As a company that is mining Bitcoin, it is literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of thought and prep and effort, as well as massive physical infrastructure that goes into the proof of work. So it's not just as simple as I could just expend more energy than them. There's a ton of stuff that goes into proof of work. And so this cartoon, I kind of like it. Basically, just read through it real quick. It says that if everybody's working on block 91 in the network, and one miner wants to go back and change block 74, he would have to make changes and redo all the blocks between 74 and 90, as well as change the block 91. So that's 18 blocks worth of computing power. And the kicker is he would have to do all of that before the people at block 91 solve for that block. So if you can imagine, it's just the higher or the more stacked up the blockchain is, the more difficult it would be for someone to go back in and compromise historical transactions. And so this is just a cool way to visualize it. And so that's basically in a nutshell. And for me, like, I've spent my whole career kind of at this intersection between energy and value and monetizing energy. And so, like, I had to understand this part of it before I really got Bitcoin, because people were coming to us and saying, you can take energy, whether that's stranded energy like natural gas that didn't have a sales market that was being flared, or whether it's grid energy that's being wasted, and you can otherwise monetize that energy into a much higher value. And for somebody that spent a career kind of, duking it out to make 10-cent margin on natural gas. So for example, nat gas trades at like $4 today. So, if you could find 10 extra cents somewhere in that value chain, that was a huge deal. You could make people millions of dollars for just that little bit of value. And so we built a whole business around this. And when I found out that you could sell natural gas and effectively equate it to $35 per MCF, which is roughly where it's at today, I think it may be a little lower, around $30 per MCF. It was like a earth-shattering, like I couldn't sleep for 2 or 3 days type of moment, because I just thought this just can't be real. This has to be something that's fake, or my entire career and everything I've worked on doing is going to change. And so I had to dig into this and understand why it was expending the energy for me to really get excited or get on board with actually pursuing or going down the path of doing things in the Bitcoin space. And so that's why I started with proof of work and trying to just tell you about the basics of the network. It's kind of the secret sauce, and it's what makes it be able to be decentralized. And so kind of moving on, Bitcoin's energy usage is also something that it's often attacked for, right? And so hopefully you can understand it is because the energy usage is what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. It's why we can have this trustless system. It's the proof of work. It's how we can prove that these transactions are real. And so you see all these people attacking Bitcoin, saying it's going to boil the oceans and that it's accelerating climate change and all these things. And I actually think Bitcoin's energy use is a good thing. And again, this has taken me some time to wrap my head around, but it's the first time in really human history that we have a large scale use of energy that is effectively agnostic to location. So Bitcoin, when you mine it, it is a very small broadband in terms of what it takes to send the signal to the network. So you can use a cell phone modem, you can use a satellite modem, and you can effectively put the Bitcoin mining anywhere. And so again, when you first hear this, you're like, okay, that's fine. You can stick a mine wherever, back behind whatever it is and plug it in. But when you think about it, and you think about energy, like I have my whole career, all of energy is effectively this game between getting supply to demand. So this microphone is plugged in here. It runs through a cord that's plugged into the wall. You can trace this with a physical object. You can trace this all the way back to a literal source of energy. There is probably a natural gas well or a coal power plant or a windmill or solar panel somewhere in the earth that is far away from here, probably relatively far away, that you have to physically trace that energy to get it to this microphone or to this computer. And so this idea of being able to take large scale demand for energy and move it anywhere to where there's supply is, again, there's just never been anything like that. And not only is it a large scale demand for energy, it is also today, currently at the Bitcoin price and the hash price for the network, it is the highest value use case for energy. So like I mentioned, the natural gas, what I talked about with natural gas, like even retail power is probably at my house, it's around 9 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Right now, mining Bitcoin, depending on how powerful your ASIC computer is, you can get potentially in excess of 30 to 40 cents for that energy. So it is, not only can you move it anywhere, it's the highest value use case. And so then you look at all the applications for this technology and you start to extrapolate it. There's just so many things it can do. So for in our industry, you have what we call flared gas or wasted natural gas. So if you drill an oil well, there is natural gas that's a byproduct of that well. And a lot of times, if there's just not an access to a pipeline, like you can drive a truck and pick up oil, but you have to pipe natural gas. So if it's in a remote area, they just burn the gas off and flare it. And so this is, number one, it's wasteful. Number two, methane escapes from the flare, which is a very high CO2 gas, and it's worse than CO2. It's a very high greenhouse gas. And so we can go directly to those wells that are flaring. We can capture that natural gas, convert it to electricity with a generator on site, and power a mobile data center that can then power this network that people are using as this new monetary network to trade value around the world. And so that's one use case that is not only has a great like ESG and environmental angle, but it's also just really cool, right? You can go and capture something that would otherwise be wasted. And there's lots of examples of this. For example, hydro-powered energy, renewables. I mean, the thing about renewables is that they don't work when you need them. They work when they work, right? So when the sun's shining or when the water's flowing or when the wind is blowing. And so there's lots of times when the power, the energy that renewables are creating doesn't match up to when we need to use it, right? The demand ebbs and flows. And so you can put Bitcoin and use it as almost like a digital battery or a virtual power plant where you can locate it at these sites. And so, for example, like Texas, where you've got this grid that during certain times, like if the wind stops blowing because it's really hot, they getting forced to have brownouts and even blackouts. And so if you could have a large scale source of demand like Bitcoin mining that could underpin additional base load. So you could say we could build a new power plant or we could build 3 new power plants. And when we don't need them, we'll be mining Bitcoin, which by the way, converts this to a much higher value that you can store forever, has no shelf life. You can send it through space and time at the speed of light anywhere in the world and transfer that value to somebody else. There's just so many things you can do with it that you couldn't do with traditional energy. And then by the way, whenever we need that energy, you can power the miners down and push it back to the grid. And now you've created effectively a battery or a virtual power plant. And so I could go on and on about the energy and how it's going to change things, but it's really just probably the most disruptive thing. And I've been in the industry for 11 years, so it's certainly the most disruptive thing I've ever seen, and something that I think has a lot of ways that can create a lot of good. One more example I'll use before I move on is, how much time do I have? I've got till the end of the hour. Okay, so one other example I'll use is like, you've got a lot of energy poverty in the world, right? So if you're in the Congo or somewhere in Africa, you may have a lot of natural resources. You might have oil and gas, you may have hydro, you may have access to energy. The problem is you don't have the infrastructure from a transmission standpoint to go underpin that hydro dam, because now you've got to lay transmission lines through the mountains or through the jungles to get it to all the different villages. And so if you had the ability to go to each locale or geographic area, build out a power source, and then when you can't probably use all that power source, but you can use it to mine Bitcoin, harness that value, and then what's ever left over, you can put it into the community. And if you need to turn the mining off to power more stuff in the community, you can. But it effectively acts as like an anchor tenant to support energy projects in different parts of the world where there may be energy poverty. So it sounds kind of crazy that could be something that could help energy poverty around the world, but it's already happening today. We're hearing about it in certain third world countries where people are going out at a small scale and taking energy sources and mining Bitcoin and using that as a source of revenue to help them from an economic standpoint, but then also used to power their villages and their communities. And so again, just this idea that you can bring this really high value of energy and move it mobily around the world is it's just a thing it could change a lot of things. And so back to the total energy usage, you hear these headlines, Bitcoin uses all this energy. Like currently today, the network uses about 0.1% of the entire world's energy. So it's very small. And even if Bitcoin keeps growing at the rate that it's growing at, which it's growing at about 2 times the speed that the internet grew at from a disruption standpoint, it's pretty shocking. But even if it does, I mean, the most that we see in projections that it'll get to is still 0.1%. So this is a rounding error in the world's energy usage. It is using a lot of energy, but so does a lot of other things, right? Like clothes dryers use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Consumer electronics use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Hot tubs use more energy than the Bitcoin network. So the next time you read something that Bitcoin's accelerating climate change or is destroying the planet, this is just what we call FUD. It's a good headline that people like to click on it. But if you really look at it, the energy usage is not only the secret sauce and what makes this possible, it's actually a good thing for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier and what it can do in the energy markets. So talking more about the FUD, because this is what everybody likes to talk about. So you hear it all the time, like Bitcoin's the next tulip bubble. That's one that you see pop up probably every 6 months in an article. Why don't they, or the government's going to ban it. that's another one. So I'll talk on that one. I think Bitcoin as a money, and we're going to go in the next slide, we'll talk about what money is, but the government, what you're going to see is that number one, the government's going to tax it. They already are taxing it. You'll see governments like China that want to move to ban it and that have said that it is banned. And I think they'll probably put some regulatory framework around it. Maybe they will outright ban it forever, but people will ask me about that and they'll say, look, China's banning it. What's stopping the US from banning it? And my first response is usually, well, that's bullish, right? Because if the governments are banning it, that means it's working. It's like doing what it's supposed to do, which is creating a new form of money, which they don't like because they want to control the money system. But the other thing is that governments are going to embrace it. So look at what Texas is doing. Governor Abbott keeps coming out and talking about it. They know that they're a big energy state. They've embraced it. They want to be the Bitcoin mining capital. I think Oklahoma needs to step up. We're working on that. Senator Ted Cruz and some of the other Texas legislators have been very vocal, speaking out about it. Senator Loomis in Wyoming has come out in support of it. So I think in the world where you see places with freedom, with pro-business, with places that want to facilitate trade, I think they will embrace this technology. And then you look at a country like El Salvador, which has recently made Bitcoin legal tender in the country, and they've mandated that everybody have to take it and use it for transactions. And so people say the government's going to ban it. Well, this year, a government made it their currency. And so that's the trend that we're seeing. And we're going to see some governments that won't like it, and we're going to see others that will embrace it. And I think that's true with a lot of technology. The other one is like, why don't they just create another Bitcoin? You've got Ethereum, you've got Dogecoin, you've got whatever other meme coin that they decide to make. And a couple of things. It's like, look, I could go create another Wikipedia. I could copy Wikipedia's source code, and I could go and post it. And I could pump a bunch of marketing dollars into it, right? And say, hey, everybody use my Wikipedia. Like, no one's going to use my Wikipedia. Like, it's just, there's a thing called a network effect, which people in here probably understand. But it gets back to the energy usage. Like, the Bitcoin network is so robust, and it's growing at such a rapid speed. Like, right now where the Bitcoin network is at, it's about where the internet was in 1997. And this is a stat that people throw around. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's growing at 2 times the speed of the internet. So where it's at today is very, very early on, and that network effect is continuing to grow. And so, the other thing about it is that, like, these other altcoins, they're trying to do something that Bitcoin's not. I would almost like equate them more to like a company or like equities. You got like Ethereum 1.0, 2.0. They got a new team of developers like Solana and all these other coins, and it's changing all the time. They're upgrading it. They're printing more, and it's like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't want my money to change. Like, I want my money to be the same money that I had 2 years ago. I want it to be the same money next year. I don't want like a 2.0 version of my money. I want